Hello, everyone. I have never worked harder to get an interview than I have worked to get Paul Hawken, the founder of Project Drawdown, the author of Drawdown, the book, the editor, the researcher, the one and only Paul Hawken here on the show. So stick around. You don't want to miss this episode.
Welcome to the Your Mark on the World show with your champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
So, Paul, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Devin.
We're thrilled to have you. So, Paul, you have undertaken really what I view as the most positive step in the environmental movement in more than a generation. One of the criticisms I hear as a sympathetic environmentalist myself is people say, well, all you talk about is negative stuff, all you environmentalists. And so what I love about your work is I point those critics to your work. Say, this isn't some mystery. We have a clear path to solve this problem. How did you come to start this project, the project, or to create this list of climate change solutions?
Well, I agree with you. I think the communication about climate has been scientifically impeccable and psychologically disastrous. And we keep talking, or scientists talk about future existential threats, 2C in 2050 or 1.5C. And I've challenged scientists to actually go on the street and just talk to the woman and man on the street and one after another and say, what does 2C mean to you in 2050? It means nothing. And so it's been conceptual, but it's also been about future existential threat. And what we do know, Devin, is that the human brain isn't wired to deal with future existential threat. Everybody who's here is here because their ancestors were really good at dealing with current existential threat. And that's the 7.7 billion people who are here on the planet. And for me, it was reading the IPCC assessments, the first, second, third, or the summaries. I've never read the whole thing, and it was the third one where I began to ask people, okay, what can we do? I got it, got the message, science is great, but what can we do? And in 2001, when this came out, the carbon mitigation project came out from Princeton University, talking about the famous global wedges and the 15 solutions. And I, like everybody, was so anxious to look at it, read it. These are academics, these are great economists and scientists. And I was stunned by it because the 15 solutions, there was almost nothing you or I could do. We could drive less. 11 of them depended on large multinational corporations that were very conservative, and their boards or directors would have to basically spend down their balance sheet to do these solutions, and they were underwater, and nobody knew when they would be profitable. And I thought, well, wait, this is not a good plan. This doesn't make me feel hopeful. This is not a to-do list. And that's when I began to ask other academics and NGOs, like, what are the top solutions? What are the 100 biggest solutions that we know how to do, that are scaling, that not wannabes or silver bullets, but things we know how to do now? And I spent years asking people to do this, and no one did. So in 2013, I decided to do it with a group of friends.
Well, it was fascinating. It's really a page turner, which is remarkable for a summary of the sort that the book is, but it's been very popular, and I congratulate you on that. As you went through this and created this list, I'm sure there are a lot of things on there that surprise other people, and I'll ask you for some of those. But was there anything on the list that had a big impact that really surprised you when you tallied up its potential impact?
Most certainly. I would say the one that had the biggest impact on me was number 3, which is reduce food waste, the number 3 solution. And again, it wasn't so much a list. It is a list in the end. What we did is we started with 200-300 solutions, and Amanda Ravenhill and Chad Fishman and myself and Crystal Chazelle, we all started going through them, and doing back of the napkin calculations. Like, you take your cup into Starbucks. Nice idea. It has no impact whatsoever, virtually none. And we started sorting them out. And then we got to a smaller pile. Then we did front of the napkin calculations, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then we started again, and then we started to do vector analysis, system dynamics modeling of the solutions, serious stuff. And some of them dropped out too. And we are left with 80 of the most impactful solutions to reverse global warming. And I think the other thing about this that is important to name is to convey is we wanted to name the goal. And, fighting, mitigation, stabilization, those don't make any sense at all. The only goal that makes sense is to reverse global warming. So we wanted to name it and see if we could achieve it in 30 years' time by 2050. But reduced food waste was a real surprise because I thought I was very frugal and didn't waste food. And I began to realize that every time I did, it was like, oh, well, I didn't eat this, I don't like this, or it kind of rotted in the refrigerator or whatever. There's always an excuse. So I got too much at a restaurant, I can't eat all this, and I'm traveling, I can't take it home with me, all that sort of stuff. And that really changed my behavior. And it's so good about that because if you change your behavior about something that's seemingly prosaic, what happens is then you're aware every three times a day about your planet and gratitude and the food and how much energy goes into the food.
Yeah.
In the United States, we throw away 40 to 40%, 45% of our food is tossed. We make it, we truck it, we distribute it, we farm it, we package it, we buy it, we go to the store, we bring it home, and 45% of it is thrown away.
So where does most of that food waste occur? Is it at each step, at the store, at the, some at the farm, some at the distribution, some at the table? Where does most of it happen?
Most of it happens at home, but it happens everywhere. Stores throw a lot of food away, especially produce. Farmers have to throw it away because when it's ready, there's too much of it, or it's undersized for marketing orders, or it's blemished. It's called ugly vegetables or ugly fruit. It's perfectly nutritious and fine. And then there's also restaurants. Restaurants serve too much. They give you a basket of bread. You don't want bread. It sits there. They throw it away. They can't serve it to somebody else. There's almost fashionable for many women to order something and then to push it away with food on. Like, I'm thin. I'm going to stay thin. This is too much. Instead of really being thoughtful about what they ordered in the first place. So all those things conspire to do that. Most of it's left at home, and also refrigerators where food goes to die, basically.
Yeah. So, Paul, that was one that really surprised you. Yeah. What are some of the items on the list that surprise other people when you talk to them?
Well, girls' education was number 6. And it surprised a lot of people. It shouldn't really. Girls who do not get an education because they're taken out of school to go to work to put their brothers through school, or to get early marriage by their elders or their father. Those girls have on an average of 5 children. They're not as well educated. Their health is impaired because oftentimes they're pregnant at a very early age. And they live in more poverty. Their children don't do well. It's a vicious circle, if you will. And if a girl is allowed and supported to stay at school through what we would call high school, or some equivalent thereof, she has on average, her reproductive rate is 2 children, just slightly less than replacement rate. But she has a better education. She makes more money. She puts those resources into her children, and whether she has a son or daughter or both, they replicate their mother's behavior. And so the difference there it's a type of family planning, but it's not family planning. She does the planning. We support her to become a woman on her terms, basically, as a society. And it's the difference between 10.8 billion people in 2050 and 9.7 billion people, which is the difference between the high and median UN population projection for that time. And almost all of that is attributed to family planning.
Yeah. A lot of the interventions on your list are expensive to implement. Mm-hmm. Not all. Some are cheap. And some actually have economic benefits in addition to the environmental benefits, like the alternative concrete on the list has a remarkable economic benefit. Am I understanding your chart right when I asked that question?
Yeah, you are. I mean, what we did is we measured the impact that these solutions have now, and then the impact they would have over 30 years if they continue to scale. And they're all scaling. We didn't measure things that are just sitting on the shelf or prototypes. The other thing we did is we measured the economic impact. In other words, what does it cost and what would be the return if there's a return over 30 years? And for those numbers, we use the International Energy Agency, the World Bank, the IPCC, Bloomberg Energy. We use all really highly respected international sources of economic data. On the carbon side, we use peer-reviewed science. So all the data in Drawdown is not our data. We source it. There's the data. You can find it yourself. And what we did is reflect back to the world what it's doing and what it knows. It's not what we know, it's what you know. I mean, the bigger we. And one of them was economic return. And you have like wind, which right now has a 7.43 trillion return over 30 years. And since we published the book in April of 2017, those numbers have almost doubled. Because the cost has continued to go down. The learning rate continues at a very rapid rate. And so, yeah, about 70% of the solutions are actually very profitable. And the other 20% are sort of break even, and 10% lose money. So yeah. It's actually the opposite of, I think, what people say, which is, oh my God, it's a cost, we can't afford it. We say we can't afford not to.
Yeah. So even some of those things that are expensive to do have economic benefits that far exceed the investment, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at it from that point of view, and we should, there's two things. One is they have cascading benefits besides atmospheric ones in terms of pure water, better food, better farming, less inputs, healthier children. It just goes on and on and on, more jobs. But putting that aside, I mean, we would want to do these for pure economic reasons. In other words, if we were just a straight green shade economist, we would say, do it. This makes money. Right now in Colorado, you can take down an operating coal-fired power plant, demolish it, put up a wind turbine, and save money if you're a company. Save money. In other words, you can make more money.
Yeah.
So that's where we are. We're kind of at the crossover, Devin, where it used to be, and not that long ago, but 10, 20 years ago, the cost of the problem was so much cheaper than the cost of the solution. It was hard to really convince people that they should move over to the solutions because, well, I'm subsidizing what, Now, I feel like in electric cars, in wind, in solar, in so many areas, actually the cost of the solution is cheaper than the current.
Yeah. As you look at the list today, your current roster shows refrigerant management as the top intervention.
Yeah.
It's interesting to people. I don't think most of us are spending a lot of time thinking about refrigerants. Why is that so important?
Well, we didn't either. And what the thing about that drawdown is we didn't know what the top solutions would be. We really went into it with an open mind. Do we have a personal belief? Of course. And we were just as surprised as anybody to see refrigerant management as being the number one solution. The reason for that is refrigerants are 1 to 9,000 times more powerful than carbon dioxide in a global warming potential. And they're just being released all the time from faulty air conditioners, from when people stop using air conditioners and recycle them, refrigeration systems themselves are leaking. And so just the refrigerants themselves that are leaking would actually cause it to be the number one. During the time we wrote the book, the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol was passed. And I think Al Gore and others said this is another 70 gigatons, the number one solution, added to what we already calculated. So it would definitely still be number one.
Wow. It's a fascinating insight, because most of us aren't thinking about that.
Well, luckily we don't have to. The refrigeration companies are on it. They really are. And agencies, governments, and so forth. It's not something individuals can do so much, about. But like it's the opposite of food waste, where almost that's something you can do something about every day.
Yeah. Now, one controversial item on the list is nuclear power.
Yes.
How do you think about that? I know that there are some environmentalists who are saying we've got to do nuclear to save the planet, and others are saying it's too environmentally expensive to justify. How do you come down on this?
We don't. That's the whole point. If we came down on it one way or the other, that means our personal bias would have entered into drawdown, and therefore everything would be suspect. And we have personal feelings about it. I do about nuclear. It is 11% of the world's electrical generation capacity. China is very active in it. You see in the West, we're pulling back because of cost overruns and lack of insurance. And so we looked at it objectively. Well, what is going to happen in the next 30 years? And then put that forward. At the same time, as an environmentalist, the fact is we do know that things have gone quite wrong with nuclear power plants. And so there is a statement at the end of it calling it's a regrets solution. And a regret solution means that it can cause problems that are unanticipated and unintended. And I just list the regrets very at the end. And so it's subjective, and it talks about current Gen 3's nuclear reactors, where we're going with the Gen 4s, the smaller ones, what's possible. And there's also, in coming attractions, there's also a discussion of nuclear fusion as well. So it's really important that underlying technology of the book, by the way, Devin, there is a technology of the book. One, the title, name the solution and the problem together. I mean, there's David Wells Wallace has Uninhabitable Earth. It's not something you can take home and read at night and buy your bit, okay? So the solution and the problem together, so it's interesting. Number two, to be collaborative. I wasn't the researcher. I mean, we were 228 people, and we felt it was really important that when people saw the book, it wasn't Paul Hawken. Okay, it was scientists and academics, and we had politicians as our advisors, and business people, and we had researchers from 21 countries all over the world, from the top universities, scholars, and we all came together and worked at creating this. And I think that was really important. Third thing we didn't do is we had the research, but it was rewritten by Catherine Wilkinson and myself. We rewrote it, but we never advocated. Now, this sounds so crazy for an environmentalist to say no advocacy, but there's no should, there's no oughts, there's no you need to in there, because that is kind of a way to guilt trip people. And what we wanted to create is spaciousness around these. So you read it and go, oh, wow, I didn't know the first solar panel went up in 1884 in New York City. As you read it, there's those stories or narratives, LEDs go back to 1870, in terms of diodes. So you look at it in a very different way, and it creates space for you to make up your own mind. And the next thing we didn't do is doom and gloom. The next thing we didn't do is divide. By divide, I mean blame, shame, demonize, point fingers, or make somebody wrong. And you don't make somebody wrong by not being right. And so I say in the introduction of the book, this book is not right. We worked our buns off to get it approximately right, but no model of the future is correct. But sometimes there's useful models, and we think this is a useful model. And the other thing we did is made it beautiful with imagery that you want to look at it and go, wow, this is so beautiful. Who's that? And what are they doing? As opposed to something that's just all typeface or, sort of depressing imagery. And that's why it's taught from 4th grade in the United States to MIT graduate school, the same book, because it has so many entry points for different people. And as a writer, and you're a writer, what you try to do is not to use buzzwords or things that are like basically put people off and say, oh, well, he thinks that, or he's conning me, or this is his shtick. You're a journalist. And so you are very assiduous about not doing that. And so the book is the same way, which is we try to take care of the reader and allow her or him to come in a way that they would want to, without trying to tell them who they are, or what they should do, or what's wrong. And I feel that's why it was a bestseller the first week it came out, and it's in 12 languages, or soon to be. It's been very popular. And it's so interesting, Devin, because my editor of 30 years at Penguin didn't want to publish it. And because it's expensive, it's in color, it's post-consumer waste, and mostly because climate books don't sell.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was true.
And it's a list. It's a list. Yeah. Who would have thunk, right? That a list would be so popular. It is a compelling read. As you look at interventions, I think there are some that are not on the list, some new things. And some of those are controversial too. And I wonder if you would give us some framework for thinking about things like people have talked about putting things, mirrors in space, or essentially contaminants in the upper atmosphere to dim the sun,
right,
to keep the temperature under control. How do you evaluate and react to those things as they gain at least discussion traction?
Well, that's called geoengineering. And there's a lot of proposals, a lot of discussion about it. They aren't solutions we can model because there's no data. They don't exist. So there's no peer-reviewed science. There's just speculation. So we don't model those solutions. We do have 20 coming attractions. And these are technologies or practices or techniques that are valid scientifically. They've been validated. So it's not a question of whether they do what they say they do. They do. It's just that they don't have enough data yet for us to model it, both on the economic side because they're embryonic or incipient or just started, or because the science hasn't been done yet. And for those, we take very seriously. On geoengineering, it sort of speaks to two things. One is that there is this constant sort of I think desire for silver bullets, the thing that's going to, the one ring that will rule them all, like in the trilogy, I mean, that one thing, it's a very male thing to do, by the way. Women don't think that way. They're more thinking about community and together and how can we, men try to think how to be a hero. And so you see that in geoengineering. I'm not saying it's not poorly intended. I think the intentions are very good, and the thought that's going into it, I think, is useful. But what I think we show with Drawdown is that we don't really need to do that. In other words, we have the solutions at hand, and if you don't look at what is at hand, then you're going to try to come up with some Promethean solution that no one's ever heard of, or that will block the sun. Basically, both sulfates and mirrors do that, and they scatter the light or they reflect it back to space. And that would work because we know volcanoes do that, but it doesn't really solve the problem. It just delays it. And even then, there's unintended second and third order effects which can't be predicted on a complex place called Planet Earth.
Yeah. A fascinating discussion. Paul, as you reflect on your remarkable career, what are you most proud of having accomplished?
The thing, proud, I'd probably say proud. I probably the drawdown is the, is probably the most impactful thing I've done. It's not the thing that sold the most, but book, but it's definitely the one that it has had the biggest influence. So I'd say Drawdown. And I think the trick there was not to accomplish it by myself, but to be a convener, to gather, to share, to collaborate. Because I feel like, the emphasis over and over and again is what can you do? This is what you can do. People say, what can I do about climate change? It's a fair question, and we should do things, but I think the real question is what can we do? And we wanted to model that as well. What can a group of people do coming together from different backgrounds, and so I'm proud of that. The next book is called Regeneration: How to Create 1 Billion Jobs and Reverse Global Warming. So maybe I'll be proud of that one too. I don't know. We'll see.
Oh, that's great. What do you think as you look back, especially in terms of environmental consequences, what's the most important lesson you've learned?
The most important lesson probably would be to go outside. It sounds stupid, I know, but think about it. There is a movement, may no child be left inside, It's like, I feel like with our devices, our electronics, our media, we think the world happens on our screens, or we access it through our screens. And nature is so different than that. And I feel like you're going to protect and save what you love. And you can't fall in love with life unless you actually go out there and spend time there. And I was lucky to do that as a child. I spent a lot of time outside. And so, and I feel like that's missing right now for our children, and especially when they're urbanized, but even if they're not and they're suburbanized by the overemphasis on electronics as a access point to the world instead of real experience. And that's what I've learned. And I feel like there's forest schools, and there's a lot of work now to try to get kids back out, into, it's called nature, but there must be a better word for it, but I call it life. And, and to feel awe, to experience awe and wonder, and see the world differently, see it from so-called outside looking in, as opposed to inside looking out. And I feel like it connects us in a way that is visceral, that's deep, that's archetypal, that's primeval, that brings us to a sense of ourselves. It's very different than what happens indoors.
What drew you initially to your work and your career that included the environmental and climate change work that you've had such an impact on?
Well, I said earlier, I traveled outside. The reason I did is because it wasn't safe inside. So unfortunately, I didn't come from a happy home, and but it's a blessing. And I always felt safe outside. So even if there were storms or lightning, or I lived in California, still do, but there was forest fires, I always felt safe. I never felt threatened by anything that happened outside. I felt like I was home, held. It was my real mom nature and mother nature. And just, like I said, a great affinity and love developed for that. And at the same time, I had asthma from 6 months old until I was 20, and serious asthma, and went to doctors and took lots of pills and to breathe, otherwise I would die. And when I was 20 years old, I read a book that said, if you're sick, it's your fault. And I was so mad when I read that because I had it 6 months. What do you mean? It wasn't my fault, you know? But actually, I was intrigued by it because it said you also have agency. In other words, you're not a victim, you know, you can do something. And so I went on a 10-day diet where I just ate rice and tea, and my symptoms went away. And I thought, whoa, wait a minute. It's like it's 20 years and all these doctors. And then I said, wait a minute, this can't be. And I started to go back and forth, bring people, not people, but food into my diet, you know, and this and that. And I could actually experience the impact of single things because I was essentially fasting. And that led me to start Erewhon, which is in LA, but the natural food business, I started in Boston, and I went into natural foods. And I thought, well, if I can figure this out, other people will figure it out too, that, you know, that eating what Michael Pollan calls food-like substances is not a really good idea for them.
Yeah.
And that took me to farmers all over. My grandfather was a farmer. I lived on a farm for a while, but I mean, it took me to farmers all over the country and talking, listening to them and what they faced and why they used chemicals or why they didn't. So one thing led to another, really. You know, it was that interface between human beings and life itself, you know? And life does something, people, you say, what does life do? You know, well, life creates the conditions that are conducive to life. And all of life does that. And I just felt like, well, that's what we should do. We're life. We're not humans, we're life. We call ourselves humans. We're life. We're living entities just like everything else out there. And the only goal or the only purpose that makes sense for us collectively as individuals, as businesses, as companies, as cities, as countries is to create the conditions that are conducive for life. And that creates prosperity, it creates health, it creates well-being, it creates community, it creates connection. And when we don't do that, we create the opposite: poverty, lack, war, ill health, both in the environment and in ourselves. And so it became very clear, you know, to me that was my path in life, to do that. But then to find out how or where or why, and, you know, I've been figuring it out ever since and trying to learn, and I still am.
Paul, what is your superpower?
I've never used that term. I've never thought about it. I know you were going to ask me that question, so I did think about it for that reason. I feel like everybody has a superpower, but it is there already. It's not, you know, aggregated or gained or bought or something you seek. It's there innately in each person. And it's revealed when you are able to sort of peel away the beliefs and delusions of the world, you know, that tries to tell you who you are, what you should think, and what is true and what is not true. And to the degree to which you can, you know, come into your native self, you know, your native DNA, you know, of who Devin is, you know, there's your superpower. Because you see clearly, you accept, you're at peace with yourself, you understand your thoughts are just your thoughts and they're not real, as opposed to being reality. And it is another way to fall in love with the world and be in gratitude for actually just being alive. There's a wonderful Native American prayer, which I won't quote, but the first line of it says, I'm so grateful because this morning I woke up to light. There's light, you know, and we forget about that, you know, that there's light. It's light is extraordinary. It creates life and photosynthesis and warmth and, you know, and we just, oh yeah, light, you know. And so when you peel that stuff off, I feel like you also go right into that gratitude. That gratitude actually connects you to the world in a way that's very powerful. not the way we think of power, but as force, which I don't think is power. Power is actually awareness and understanding and connection and intelligence, and that's real power.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. What a joy to have the opportunity to speak with you one-on-one. It's just a real privilege. But before you go, would you take just 1 minute and tell people how they can learn more about your work, how they can connect with you, perhaps on social media, and et cetera?
Sure. To learn more about Project Drawdown, you can go to www.drawdown.org. And you don't have to buy the book. You can see the solutions there and descriptions, and there's a lot more there. To get in touch with me, I'm at on Twitter at Paul Hawken, so that's Hawken, not Paul Hawken. If you want to get in touch with me directly, info@paulhawken.com. We'll get there right away, and we respond right away. Know that I'm writing a book, and so I get about 200 emails a day. So if you don't get an answer from me, it's because I'm a little bit busy. And I'm also on Facebook as Paul Hawken. So there's only one that I know of so far, but with Ken.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, Paul, thank you so much. Again, we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and we wish you every success in the great work that you're doing.
Devin, thank you so much for the way you support the people you interview. I've loved working with you, and it was a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Paul. I really appreciate it. You have a great day now.
You too.
Let's do some good.
Thank you for listening. Devin Thorpe's mission is to end extreme poverty, improve global health, and mitigate climate change before 2045 by finding and sharing the stories of those who are doing the most good. You can join with other listeners to accelerate Devin's mission by visiting helpdevin.org right now.